So do you work for somebody or are you freelance like me?
Technically, I mean, I have my own like Seeley Communications and primarily work through, like marketing agency type work. And then through that, through agencies kind of go to, different clients. So,
Okay, so we're live now on streaming. We're
okay.
streaming now. Hello? We're live. Hey, everybody.
Hey. Yes, we are live now.
Cool. We're talking.
Welcome everyone to our evening and discussion of South Carolina stories with Bren McClain and John Seeley. I'm Brooke McKinney with the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and thanks for joining us. Throughout the discussion, you can feel free to use the chat feature in the Zoom to ask any questions or post comments. We will take time towards the end to answer those, but also throughout, if you have a question that pops up in discussion, then we'll be happy to answer those as well. Thank you, John and Bren. Now I'd like to introduce you both to everyone. Bren McClain's critically acclaimed debut novel, One Good Mama Bone, from Pat Conroy's Story River Books, won the 2017 Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction and the 2018 Patricia Wynne Award for Southern Literature. It was also named Pulpwood Queen 2017 Book of the Year. The novel can now claim international in its credits since it was recently published in France and retitled Mama Red. Bren is at work on her next novel, which has already received acclaim as the gold medal winner for the William Faulkner Novel in Progress. She is also a contributing essayist to the award-winning anthology Our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remember Pat Conroy. A native of Anderson, South Carolina, Bren now lives and writes near Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you, Bren.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you. That's adorable.
That's right. I remember about a year ago. I think it was right during the beginning of the pandemic when that guy on BBC or whatever had his toddler walk in and everybody was like, "Oh no, look at this, that's so funny." And now it's just an everyday occurrence where, something like that goes down.
Right.
Oh, I apologize. Jane's just really excited.
He is. Hey, James.
He hasn't seen you since last March.
I know. I was just thinking last March I saw him. Yes.
Thank you. All right. John Seeley is the author of The Whiskey Baron, published by Hub City Press in 2014, and The Edge of America, published by Haywire Books in 2019. An upstate South Carolina native, he has a degree in English from the College of Charleston and an MFA in fiction writing from Purdue University. His short fiction has appeared in the Normal School, Pink, and The Sun, among other venues, and his nonfiction has appeared in The Rumpus, The Millions, and the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Seeley's most recent novel, The Merciful, explores a hit-and-run in a coastal South Carolina tourist town and the subsequent trial, providing both a gripping courtroom drama and a probing look at questions of justice and mercy in our era of competing narratives and online outrage. Seeley is currently a freelance writer and the publisher of Haywire Books, which has published Patricia Henley, Heather Bell Adams, and Mark Powell. He lives with his family in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. Thank you both for being here. So I wanted to start off by asking you both, well, I would like for both of you to read from your novels, if you can. Whoever wants to go first.
John, you go ahead. You've got your new book out.
Sure. So this is the new, not sure how my screen is going to work with this, but this is the new book called The Merciful. And let's see. I will read just an early chapter, just a short 2.5 pages here. I don't think you need any real context, but just as a kind of a overview of the book, it's kind of got this framed narrator, and it's about a guy who discovers that his friend from college is the alleged culprit in this hit and run, and kind of the book is sort of his trying to analyze what happened and also sort of reconcile, his what he's reading in the news about his friend that he hasn't seen in a long time with the guy he used to know. So that's sort of the setup, and so I'll just read the first couple pages here. Sometimes you have to shatter your life. Daniel Hayward told me this years ago over a bottle of wild turkey by a campfire on the banks of the Chattooga River. He and I had recently graduated from the College of Charleston and were on a rafting trip with a group of guys before we all scattered across the American empire. It had been an exhilarating day on the river, enough rapids to give us a few jolts in the raft, but plenty of long stretches where the river was like glass and we cracked open beers. No sound more satisfying under a Carolina sun than the pop and hiss of a can of cold lager. A few hours before making camp, we hit a rock and went over second ledge backward. The most experienced river rat among us, who was in the other boat, said the rapid was easy to contend with. Hit it straight on, and it would be no problem. Until it was a problem. An unexpected rock, hidden beneath the water, sent us off course. And I vividly remember all these years later the sound of the raft as it lurched sideways, and how I, on the starboard side of the raft, peered over and into the boiling water, into water boiling in an eddy below. Then we were over and somehow bobbing down the river with cries of woo, and we styled that, belying our relief from not spilling out. Although I grew up less than 20 miles from the coast and knew the breathtaking expanse of water, taking a raft down the river, down this wild and scenic river, was an almost mystical experience. The guys and I talked about it, about what it meant to be a man in the 21st century, and about the primeval experience of getting into the woods, about humans' innate fascination with fire and water, and about our past experiences of roughing it with our friends, our fathers, our brothers. We talked about Second Ledge and how people died on this river and how we had the Bull Sluice to navigate the next day. Then night settled in and the fire smoldered, and Daniel and I were the last men standing, passing the whiskey between us, our minds thick with a slurry of booze and mesmerized by the crackle and flames. I've been swimming in the low country rivers, but this is a whole different experience, I said. I don't know if it's the rapids or the fact that we're on our own out here, I mean, if something happened to us, if one of us caught a finger with that axe or got bit by a copperhead, we'd have to hike how many miles to get out? A bad enough injury, you wouldn't get out at all. Daniel took a sip of the wild turkey and held the liquor in his mouth for a moment before swallowing and said, sometimes you have to shatter your life. I thought about this one Friday evening more than a decade later when I found out that my old friend, who had married the mystery girl and moved down to the coast to sell data mining software and play golf in the hometown of Overlook, South Carolina, was arrested for the hit and run killing of a college girl on a bicycle. The incident alleged to have happened after the business dinner with an attractive client. The client, Karen Sinclair, was a formidable businesswoman pushing 40, divorced, sultry, mysterious in a way that only certain women allowed themselves to be after the age of 25. Daniel had been married 7 years and had no business at a late evening one-on-one with such a woman. Shatter your life indeed. This was merely the first of many such compromises I would have to reconcile with the man I knew from college. Daniel Hayward was brilliant but lazy. He came to Charleston from Ohio for the girls and the beach. The son of a Cleveland hospital executive and fundraising socialite, he entered college knowing how to work a crowd, how to make people feel good about themselves in his presence, and how to get what he wanted without appearing like a politician. He would never have made it in politics, I believe, because he had a moral center. I'm an asshole, he once confided to me during one of those drunken truth sessions indulged in by the young. I tried to tell him, no, you're a good guy, but he replied with, whenever there's a choice between doing the right thing and doing what's best for me, I do what's best for me every time. Another line I chewed over after the arrest. I'd studied enough philosophy in college to have definite opinions about intentions versus consequences, and about Daniel Hayward I'd concluded this. We all have mixed intentions and mixed results in life, which by any measure makes us less than noble creatures. Yet goodness stems in part from accountability. The Daniel I'd known had always taken responsibility for his life and his actions, which should have been enough. And yet, We came of age in a different era, and I'd known him in a different life. By the summer of his arrest, America had become arrested by politics, and when the news of his broke, I was working as a business consultant for a firm that offered strategic communications, a once aspiring novelist who now worked with 20th century corporations struggling to find profit in the 21st century. And I looked up at a world transformed, a world where context and nuance no longer seemed welcome. Like the corporate clients I worked with, I'd somehow become part of the system and was struggling to keep up even as another recession loomed in our economy. Daniel Hayward's arrest gave me my first occasion in early middle age to look backward, and I realized just how much and how quickly the world had changed. The criteria by which I might evaluate my friend had changed. So did I even really know him? Had I ever known him? Did I know myself?
Hmm.
So that's the, opening little bit.
Yeah. And folks, I've read John's book. It's awesome. It is totally awesome. This character, Daniel, at the center of this story is a very interesting character. And John, that piece that you just read just gives us a glimpse of this book. It's really an awesome book. I recommend it.
No, well, thank you. Thank you.
All
Well,
right. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to read. You done started on your teaching of me with my boy. Can I tell you that, girl? I don't know your name. What's your name? Mine's Sarah. I come back out here to thank you. I'm 6 days now into having to be his mama full on. But can I tell you something? I don't know how to be. I don't mean to be whispering, but them words, be a mama, they scare me. I'm lost. See, if me and you was a long piece of cloth, you'd be on one end with me clear across the whole wide world on the other, trying to hang on to a skinny piece of nothing. Because as good a mama as you are, I don't know how to be a mama. You can sure tell that boy there of yours is. Them two colors on y'all's faces, that pretty red brown and that white. And both of them arranged in that same exact pattern, except his is littler. Like his ears and his forehead is stamped in that red color across the bottom of your face. Like his shadow is fallen on you for all time so that you won't never leave him. No man, Mama Red, you don't. Mama Red, can I call you that? See, my boy don't look like me. That's because he's not my flesh and blood. Oh, to say those words out loud. Not another soul that's alive on this earth knows that but me. The two that did are dead. I see you holding your head just as still, listening to me with that good kind of mama way you got. This ain't the first time I seen it. The first time was when I was a girl, 6-year-old. An old mama dog showed it to me. She come across our backyard one afternoon. I spotted her out the kitchen window when I was making some cornbread for Mama before prayer meeting. Get it smooth now, girl, Mama hollered down to me. She was upstairs on her sewing machine. Don't want to see no pones, no big fat pones sticking up out of it. I took off out that screen door after that dog, but I didn't see her nowhere. I wanted to call out, hey, girl, but I kept quiet. Mama's room was right up over me and her window was open. It was hot and in August right before I started to the first grade. Then I heard the sound like a steady beat from under the house, so I crawled up under it, and there she was. That was her tail I was hearing. That dog, she was wagging it for me. And I believed it was for me. But then her legs went to lifting up, holding them stiff like broom handles. And she let out this squeal and stretched her head back towards her tail that was all hiked up. And there she come back holding something in her mouth by her teeth and started shaking it hard like she's mad at it. But she wasn't mad at it. She'd had a puppy. She laid it real soft in the dirt and got her tongue and licked it and then took her nose and tucked in that baby up to her teats so she could get her a good drink. My eyes started filling up in buckets. She had 4 more of them. I scooted back that way so I could watch. I wanted to see it all. And just like you would, Mama Red, she welcomed every one of them like she was saying to them, "Hey there, I'm your mama, and I think you're good." But then my mama started calling my name. I didn't want to leave you, but I knew I had to go. Before I left, I soaked up how still that mama dog was, and that made me get all still too. I whispered to her, "I love you." She held her eyes on me like I might matter. And then I crawled out and Mama yanked me to my feet and said, "You ain't got no time to be playing, girl." I wasn't, I told her. I was just watching a mama dog have puppies. "Don't you talk back to me," she said, and slapped a fly swatter up against my shoulder. "It was sweet, Mama, what I seen." I said, "Sweet? It's just having babies. Anything to have babies, that ain't nothing. And you so fat you'd smush them." Then she brought that swatter down and hit me on my arm. It stung some, but not like the words she said to me next. And with every one of them, she timed out a slap. She said, "You ain't got you one good mama bone in you, girl." I felt like a knife that sliced me open, cut part of me and flung it to the winds. "Nobody wants to see no crybaby," she said. "You better learn to carry it," is all I say. Papa come home from the mill that night and she made him get the dog and the puppies and carrying them off somewhere. We never did have no more talk about it. But I'll tell you this now, Mama Red. My mama's words to me was the first stitch on a garment that I would wear for the rest of my born days. And once that stitch got to running, it kept going more and more off seam. I let her words take up housekeeping inside of me. They inside of me now. But I don't want them to be. All right.
That's great.
Wow. Thank you, Bren.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's nice. Thank you, John. Okay, well, I wanted to get the discussion started between you two about, since we're talking about South Carolina stories, what is a South Carolina story and maybe what it isn't, but also if you two both consider yourselves South Carolina writers and why.
John, you want to go ahead and I'll follow you?
Well, I mean, we titled this thing South Carolina Stories, but I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, I grew up, actually, I mean, Brent, I know you grew up in Anderson. I didn't grow up too far from there in a little town called 6 Mile.
I know 6 Mile, yeah.
Yeah, 6 Mile is a tiny little town, and we would go into the university town of Clemson to go out to eat, and then we would have to go down to Anderson to go to the Walmart.
Yay, Anderson.
And I mean, I live in Virginia now, but I do miss South Carolina. I love it down there. And I guess that's where all my roots are. So I usually do have that in my bio as John's from South Carolina, but he lives in Richmond now. But I mean, I since my first novel is very much steeped in South Carolina. So The Whiskey Baron came out from South Carolina Press, Hub City. It's set in Chester County in a mill town in the 30s, and was kind of about that place. But since when I went on tour for that book, and since then I've kind of been on a little bit of a tear about how the South, because of technology and because of the way people are so much more mobile, and now with remote work, I mean, it's just getting more pronounced where we're just very much a national or global community, that the regionalism is kind of dying out. And Brent, I so much appreciated your reading, because you kind of captured a little bit of the voice. I mean, you sound like a lot of, my grandparents' generation had that very pronounced South Carolina diction that, I mean, I clearly don't have. I mean, I can slide into it as an affect, but so I think there's something that's I think there's something that's kind of being lost, but I think that's also very much of a South Carolina sensibility. That's us, not to be defending the lost cause by any means, but I think there is something in the South where it's like a very nostalgic kind of culture, and a very much of a glorifying or romanticizing the past, and kind of being mournful of the world that never that no longer is. So I think might be kind of a South Carolinian, in spite of myself. So I don't know. That's sort of how I think about it and how I approach it. Bren, I don't know, what do you think?
Oh, I'm definitely a South Carolina writer. Yeah. Hook, line, and sinker. I happen to live in Tennessee now, but I'm a South Carolina writer. I mean, One Good Mama Bone is set right there in Anderson. The book I'm writing now is set more in the Midlands of South Carolina, Aiken, Augusta, Columbia, that area. It just seems to be where my heart is. I think is the biggest thing. I think about South Carolina writers. There are distinctive geographic parts of South Carolina, very distinctive in my way of thinking. And
Yeah.
I have lived, I've lived in Anderson, I've lived in Greenville, upstate. That's a very distinctive place. 6 Mile, where you're from. Wonderful apples there, by the way, John.
Right.
Yeah, right. And then you get down to the Midlands. I've lived in Columbia. And then, get to the Low Country, and I've lived at Edisto for a lot of years. So I've lived in all of these areas. And I think of South Carolina writers, I think there's a lot that we have in common, yet I think of the upstate of South Carolina really couldn't be more different than the Low Country. To me, and this is, I'm not talking about everybody. This is just in general, all right? So there are exceptions to everything. But to me, the upstate where I'm from, it's back when I was growing up, it was, lots of agriculture, so farming and textiles. Those were like the two things. And you think about those two areas. And these are people who work with their hands, largely Scotch-Irish, which I am double-barreled, my father and my mom, largely Protestant, which I am, incredibly hardworking, conservative, devoted to the land, a very, very strong work ethic. That's how I think about the upstate. The Low Country, to me, it's a little more privileged, a little more vacation-y. So let's just say leisure. And that's a different world. You think about, that's why we talk about beach reads and things. But the upstate, South Carolina, where I'm from, tends to be kind of serious. I mean, I think of Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina, that kind of award-winning, trailblazing book that was of that kind of life. But I think in general, South Carolina stories have a love of language, because in the South, John, I think you'd agree with this. We're storytellers, right? And I think language matters a lot to us, a whole lot. And so the love of the place, I think setting is very important. I know you in your book. So is that, I tried to place where your new book is. I mean, you called it what, Overlook?
Overlook. I mean, it's kind of modeled on there's a handful of towns that have some similarities, but I mean, my in-laws live in Bluffton, which is right on the inside of, the sound from Hilton Head. And, that kind of, what interests me about Bluffton is, in the last 15 years or so, they went from a population of about 5,000 to a population of 35,000. I mean, it's really exploded, and a lot of the growth has come from retirees coming, particularly out of the Midwest. So I feel like if you walk into a bar down there, you're likely to have Big Ten sports on the channel, which that's but but there's two layers to the community. So I did a little bit of work in my corporate world for a nonprofit down there that serves the kind of the underserved community, and they some of the statistics around poverty in Beaufort and Jasper counties down there are pretty astonishing. So you really have these kind of two layers. You have the sort of gated community with the publics and the kind of more well-to-do retirees, but then you do have your sort of your trailer park or the Walmart and the kind of people struggling, and I think those two layers sort of sitting right on top of each other kind of makes for an interesting tension. And I think you see that in the upstate too, where the old cotton mill communities really have kind of gone by the wayside and been sort of usurped by and I think of Greenville, I think of BMW, right? So there's a little bit of advanced manufacturing that's come into the upstate and created a different dynamic. But I mean, if you think of the 85 corridor where we grew up, but a lot of my family kind of is from Chester County, which is on the I-77 corridor, and that's sort of you go to some of those places and they've kind of, it's like stepping back in time. So you kind of have that dynamic of yesteryear and tomorrow sort of existing at the same time. And I think that's one thing that makes South Carolina interesting. And I think the South in general is experiencing a little bit of that, where a lot of and so you mentioned hardworking and some of that, but I think there's also a little bit of the right to work state, where it's non-unionized labor. So you have the auto dealers or the auto companies coming in. I know there's a Volkswagen that's in Chattanooga. I mean, there's some a little bit of some class stuff happening in the South that makes it kind of an interesting and dynamic and sort of microcosm of America, which I find really interesting.
I agree with you. If my book Mama Bone is set back in the early 50s, so we didn't have that dichotomy yet going on in Anderson. It was just that. But I think you're absolutely right as to what's going on in today's time. Dichotomy. I mean, in Anderson, for example, people are moving there. Well, first of all, it's kind of considered a bedroom community of Greenville. Mm-hmm. Where a lot of the industry is. You're talking about BMW and you're talking about Michelin, but they're moving to the lake, Hartwell Lake, in Anderson. And so if I were to ever set a book in today's time, it would have to deal with that dichotomy. And I know exactly what you're talking about in the Low Country. I've done a lot of book clubs down in the Beaufort area, like tons, and they're wonderful. And Ellie is on. Hey, Ellie. And I'm finding that a lot of people around the Beaufort area, the Bluffton, the Okatee, and all of that, a lot of people are coming from Ohio into that area. So you think what's interesting about literature forthcoming will be dealing with that dichotomy. Now, your book, The Merciful, is set in the current time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned, I think, Trump in it. Would it be the summer of 2020?
Well, I mean, I was going to have it just be the summer of 2020, but then the pandemic happened. So it kind of took out a few details to make it a little less, because it couldn't set. I mean, it's not set during a pandemic, but right. I mean, it's more or less set in the present day. And and I tried to play with that a little bit. So the gal that is killed on the bicycle, her family is kind of in the well-to-do neighborhood in the town. Daniel Hayward has come down from Ohio, and I mean, I think that was happening even when I went to college in the early 2000s, and I mean, one of my college roommates was from Ohio, it's not, this character is not based on him, but I did steal a couple of details from a guy coming from Ohio. And then one of the main characters, or one of the major characters, is the victim's boyfriend, who is kind of from the other side of the tracks, if you will. He's got a single mom, and he's not college bound. He's selling used cars, and so kind of having that little dynamic. And that was kind of a riff between him and her, even before the accident, was this sort of she's college bound and he's selling used cars, and that kind of their lives are going to be
A little divergent there. Yeah, so I picked up on that. So you're already tapping in to that dichotomy. You are in your current work here.
Yeah.
You've tapped into that, the differences. But I
Yeah.
think South Carolina is, I mean, this is so trite, I know, but I just have to say it. Good people. I mean, I have visited so many small towns in South Carolina, book clubs, libraries, and I've just been astounded at the turnout. I've been astounded at the welcoming of those, and very literate communities in the small towns. And it just makes me proud, really, to be from South Carolina and to be a South Carolina writer when I see, when I've met all of the glorious people I've met. It's been so affirming to me.
Yeah.
South Carolina is a beautiful place.
Yeah, it really is. So what's your new book about? What you say you're working on something new? Are you ready to talk about it at all? What's cooking?
Sure. Because I'm a journalist, I like to do research and things like that. Former journalist. So I'm working on a story that is a kind of a. I did 3 years of research. People who had been displaced by the Savannah River plant, the bomb plant,
Mm-hmm.
down
Yeah.
in the Augusta Aiken area. And I'm building a novel, John, inspired by the one story that I cannot shake. And I heard tons of them. So in 3 years, I did oral histories with 40 something people who'd been displaced, all kinds of people. And I heard amazing, amazing stories. But there's this one story I can't shake, and it's George and Eula Bates. They lived on their family farm in Jackson, South Carolina, on the outskirts of the bomb plant. It's like if you come down Highway 125 from North Augusta into the bomb plant, then you follow on down to Allendale and Hampton, and eventually get on down to Beaufort. Eula refused to give the federal government the right of way to run that Highway 125 blacktop through her farm. And so her land was condemned. And on August 27th, 1951, the bulldozers had been closer and closer and closer and closer, but here they are now. They're about to come through her hog wire fence. And Eula and her brother, Eula's like in her early 50s, George in his upper 40s, they both get out there with guns and hold it on the bulldozer guy, and he halts operation. They call the cops, Aiken County comes, and this is the part that I'm about to say is the reason why I'm writing this book. They come and get them so-called under control, George and Eula, and they actually took George and Eula to the state mental asylum on Bull Street and declared them both mentally incompetent. And it gets worse, and kept them for 16 years. And it gets worse when they released them in 1967 to a little bitty group home in Williston. The state of South Carolina put a lien on their estates to the tune of $11,000 each, George and Eula, $22,000. They actually charged them for keeping them there. So I am building a novel inspired by Eula. I'm picking her up in 1978 when the person I interviewed met her, and Eula was in shambles. She was 80 years old and really messed up. And all she wanted to do was go home. But anyway, they put her in a nursing home. But I'm rewriting the end of Eula's life to bring her justice. So that's what I'm working on right now. And that novel will be set in the Midlands of South Carolina.
That sounds like a great story. I mean, a very sad and, a sad story, but that sounds, and it also kind of sounds like a very South Carolina thing in terms of like, I guess it's an NRA slogan, which, but that like the American people will not comply or whatever. But I kind of think of that as sort of a, there is a little bit of a rebelliousness to the population of South Carolina, and that kind of makes
that's a component. I was thinking, I mean, stubborn and rebellious. I mean,
Yeah.
shoot, we kicked off the Civil War, you
Right.
know,
Right.
Fort Sumter, the first to succeed. And so that's in our blood and in our heritage. And I think EULA, and this is an expression of that. I think that's definitely in the South Carolina DNA, this
Yeah.
aspect of being rebellious.
Huh. I'm having a little hard time processing that they put him in a mental institution. I believe it, but that's nuts. That's really nuts. It was a state thing? That was the state did that?
Yeah. I mean, this really happened. People, oh, Bren, you're just making that up. No, I don't. Because
I
the woman
believe it.
who interviewed EULA, when EULA died in 1980, excuse me, and left Joanne her shoebox of possessions. I've got her papers. I've got her papers where she was admitted. I've got her papers when she was discharged. And it kills me to my soul to see at the top of the page in typewriter, Courier type,
Yeah.
Eula Bates, Miss Eula Bates, comma, mentally incompetent.
Mm.
Yeah, it did happen. It did happen.
Mm.
Huh.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it when it's, so keep at it. Keep at
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So South Carolina, I'm telling you, it's rich. I mean, you think about the varied literature here. I mean, I mentioned Dorothy up in the upstate. I mean, and you come on down to, my gosh, Pat Conroy, I mean, who is legendary, who is masterful. I mean, look at what he did. I mean, talk about place.
Yeah.
Talk about place, and talk about heart. Oh my gosh. It's unbelievable. And then South Carolina has a lot of commercial writers who are incredibly successful. We've got, Mary Alice Monroe up the coast there. Wow. Who has quite a stellar following. And so rich, I mean, just a varied richness, I think, in literature in South Carolina. And I'll tell you, I was thinking about what it's not, because I was trying to be true to the write-up here. And and the word urban came to me, John. I don't know what you think about this, but it's not very urban. I don't think stories in South Carolina. Do you think it's, it has much of an urban component?
No, not really. I mean, look, Greenville's a pretty lively city, but it's not huge by American city standards still. I mean, it's not an Atlanta or a Nashville or a Raleigh. And I mean, gosh, it's been 5 or 6 years since I've been back to Charleston. So I mean, the way that city was kind of transforming itself, I don't even feel like I can comment too much on the state of Charleston, but I mean, it's my grandfather was from, one of my grandfathers was from the DC area and retired to South Carolina, which is how my mom's side got here. But he always kind of commented about, this was back in the 60s and 70s, commented about, South Carolina's overgrown small towns. And I think that, Charleston definitely is still, at least my experience of it is definitely still kind of a small town. In fact, that was one of the reasons would like to have stayed and built a life there, but kind of felt like, being from the upstate, you can definitely feel a ceiling in the Charleston social circles, which, Conroy covers, and he did that perfectly in Lords of Discipline, and that still was true 20 years ago. But there's definitely kind of, if you come there, you can build a life, but there's sort of a limit to where you're, and then, I live in Richmond now, which is feels like it's about 10 years ahead of where Charleston, maybe 10 years ahead of where Charleston is, and where in the sense that a lot of that old social circle, when I got here in 2008, had kind of retired to their garden rooms a little bit, and the ceiling no longer felt like it quite so oppressive, and that you could come here and
really, that's
rocket it on up. Yeah, and it felt a little bit more, like this. It felt like it had kind of hit that stride where it was a little bit about what you bring to the table, rather than where you come from. Now, that said, there is definitely still a little bit of a you either went to VCU or you didn't.
Ah, really? Okay.
or you went to UVA or what, whatever, people, if you are, I guess they call it the grounds, if you go to UVA, so if you're kind of in that club, there's definitely a little bit of that that still exists, but it doesn't quite feel as visceral as in Charleston, where it definitely, at least 15, 18 years ago, felt like it was
There's some exclusivity there.
Yeah.
I would think. Yeah, but South Carolina, do you think you'll ever come back?
I don't know. I mean, I think we have small kids right now, and I think we're probably going to be committed to, living and seeing them through school here. But and my wife works for the state of Virginia, so and she has our health insurance and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's get down to it. Yeah.
Picking up stakes, like, I mean, I could go anywhere, I guess, but maybe one day. I mean, it might be nice to retire back down there, depending on how the world looks. I like I said, I do miss it, and every time we get down to visit the family, it kind of is a sad place to leave. So I think there's definitely a little bit of that pull that you feel like, oh, these are my people. You're kind of in your space.
Yeah, that's it. These are, and I just thought of I was talking about visiting small towns. May I share a story that I'll just never be able to, so I was in Bamberg. Do you know where Bamberg is?
No.
Okay. So you know where Barnwell is?
Yeah.
Right? Do you know what that is? So Bamberg is kind of in that area. It's a very, very small town. And it was the Friday afternoon book club at the library. And it was on Valentine's last year. And I thought, nobody's going to come to a book club on Valentine's. It was on a Friday afternoon at 4:00. I thought, well, okay, they must know what they're doing. So I went to this thing, and they had, it was right before COVID shut everything down. And I went, and it was like 40 something people had shown up. And I brought books to sell. I sold out of books. And then they said, hey, Bren, a bunch of us are going over to Connie Ray's for Valentine's dinner. You want to come with us? And I said, well, yeah. And so I went, and we started putting like tables together, and it had red lights there and all these Valentines everywhere. And they just welcomed me into the family like I knew all of them, which I didn't know any of them. But here's the clincher. Here's what I remember. This is South Carolina for me, is I'm sitting there at the dinner table, and the woman who owns the restaurant comes over to me and says, hey, Bren, I want to introduce you to so-and-so. And he was the driver of the food services truck, like from Cisco. Mm-hmm. And he was delivering like paper towels and stuff there. And she brought him over because she said, he's never met a real writer. And I wanted to introduce, we've got a real author in the house tonight. And John, that is South Carolina to me. That story right there, just kind of where the rubber meets the road. And it's why I will love it to my dying days.
Yeah.
So do we have a question here, Brooke?
Yeah, I have a couple, but also I wanted to, Caitlin posted a question here. If you see regionalism dying, what do you think will happen to Southern literature or any regional fiction?
Well, I think it might, have some, the word diluted comes to me a little bit of dilution, Caitlin, but I don't think it's going to wipe it out or anything. I really don't. I think it might dilute it somewhat and make it a little more universal. Toni Morrison said, if you write about a place and a person particular enough, you will strike the universal in us all. And so I think people will continue writing about the particular, even in the world now that has a lot of the dichotomies that John and I have been talking about. I don't think it's gonna wipe it out. I think it might dilute it somewhat. What do you think, John?
Well, I mean, I guess there are two ways of thinking about it. I mean, there's one, which is the individual writing about the particulars of a place. And I think that's always going to be with us. I kind of think of Southern literature as a distinct genre, like, mysteries or whatever. And, I mean, I guess, what do you say? It starts with Robert Penn Warren and the fugitive poets kind of coming together and saying, we're going to create a codified, body of literature, and we're going to have critics to talk about it as a counterpart to what's happening in New England. And I've always been kind of interested in how that sort of became a thing. And I've kind of posited, like, what would happen if, like, at the same time, a group of Midwesterners, Dreiser and Sherwood Anderson or whatever, got together, and instead of the Southern fugitive poets, they got like the Midwestern, like, reticence or something, and came up with a codified set of Midwestern or some other regionalism, so, like, it's always kind of intrigued me, like, why the South? Why has the South become the thing? And I think we are losing some of those sort of common elements of a genre, and I have a hard time thinking about it outside of issues of class and race. So there's, I think what somewhat unified Southern fiction as a genre is really talking about sort of like the white genre, the white Southern canon, as sort of like, connected by the lost cause of the Civil War and the loss of the Civil War. Because I think of somebody like Colson Whitehead, and his one of his recent novels was The Underground Railroad, which is largely set in the South, but you wouldn't really call it a Southern novel because it doesn't really fit the sort of lost cause Civil War Southern. And I think that is kind of, I think we've progressed our way out of that mode, per se. And there used to be an anthology called New Stories from the South that was put out by Algonquin, and you could almost trace the the dissolution. I mean, your word about it being diluted, I think, is a good one. The sort of dissolution of the Southern genre through the prefaces of that anthology, because the early ones, you have some folks like Rick Bragg or whoever talking about what it means to be a Southern writer with a capital S, and then by 2008, I think it was ZZ Packer talking about the difference between Southern with a capital S and Southern with a lowercase s. And then the very final one was in 2010, and it was edited by Amy Hempel, who doesn't have any connection at all to the South, and she even kind of was a little self-conscious of that in her preface and said, why is a non-Southerner writing, editing an anthology about Southern literature? And she kind of, gamely said, oh, well, there's stories in the South, whatever. But you could almost kind of feel the decline of the genre as a distinct thing, as I think the literary world has kind of opened up some. But I also think it has to do with maybe my generation moving out of the South, or, being raised on MTV and kind of having the MTV Ohio neutral American accent, and we're all digital and connected to people around the world, and I think so. I think that is kind of getting, the particulars of the genre have kind of dissolved. But that said, I think there's a strong case for digging into the particulars of a place, almost for the sake of preserving what it means to be an individual in the place, because I do feel like we're experiencing a little bit of the death of the individual in the face of sort of the hive mind of technology. So I almost think it's more important now for the individual to be expressing the particulars of a place, as a bulwark against the kind of against some of the technological progress. But I don't know, that's a long way around the barn of saying I'm not I think there's two ways. I think about it in two ways, is genre and then what the individual is doing.
Yeah, I love what you said about the preservation, John. I think there's a lot of value in that, the preserving of, because of the dissociation and the dilution that's going on. I love that idea of preserving.
Yeah.
All right. Bren, there's a question for you from Rick asking, how did your time in Edisto play into your writing journey?
Oh, wow. So I moved to Edisto, Rick, as you know, from Atlanta. Rick was a client of mine at Georgia Pacific who's asking this question. Hey, Rick. I moved to it plays in a huge way because I stepped into my own. When I lived in Atlanta, excuse me, I wrote my obituary one day. I was working in corporate America in Atlanta, Georgia, and it said that I worked in corporate America in Atlanta, Georgia. And I thought, oh God, I don't want to die this way. And so I said, how would you like your obit written? And I wrote that I was a writer. This is a true story, John. I'm crazy, okay? How would you like your obit written? And I wrote, I was a writer. And I left where I had died blank because God knows I didn't want to live in Atlanta. I did not want to die there. Oh, Lord. And so I went searching and there was Edisto. And so that's where I went. That's where I felt called. And so it was major for me in writing because I was dabbling in writing in Atlanta. But when I had the courage to quit my job at corporate America and kind of carve out a life for myself to make this writer part of me happen, that was about going to Edisto and standing on my own 2 feet and really giving myself over to the writer part of me versus just giving it crumbs. Because when I lived in Atlanta and corporate America, I was just giving it crumbs. When I went to Edisto and really stepped into that world, it was when I blossomed as a writer. So I credit Edisto for being that kind of opener for me and strengthening me. It really did. It's really special. Being at Edisto was very special. Thank you for asking.
Edisto is nice. Okay. Another question. Could you briefly talk about both of your influences?
John, you wanna go?
Well, I could talk about that in distinctly South Carolina terms. So I think one of the formative moments for myself as a writer was in 2002, and I have the date. I don't have it handy, but because I got a book signed, I went to the Clemson newsstand. I was home from college for fall break, and Ron Rash and George Singleton, whom I know are fan favorites down at the Pat Conroy Center, were doing a joint reading for their first sort of breakout books. I mean, Rash's 1 Foot in Eden had just come out, and I think Singleton's, I can't remember what it was, the Half Mammals of Dixie, I think had just come out, and I mean, it was a second novel or a second book of stories. But went to that reading, and until that time, the only writers I had ever read were either really famous people from elsewhere, so your Stephen Kings or John Grishams or whoever, or dead people, your Faulkners and O'Connors and stuff. But hearing those two guys, reading about where we were, so Rash read a chunk of one Foot in Eden, where the sheriff is riding up the highway in Seneca into the mountains, and Singleton read a story called This Itches Y'all about a guy who is in his childhood starred in a little kind of public health video about head lice, and it was like, oh, this is my world. Like this is the world I grew up in. This is the world I recognize, and the world I know. And I had no idea you could kind of make art out of someplace like Seneca, South Carolina, or Dacusville, South Carolina, or 6 Mile, South Carolina, or Chester, South Carolina now. So I think that was a kind of a sort of an aha moment, which I think a lot of writers have some kind of moment like that where they realize, oh, you can, you don't have to, you can do this thing. This is what's possible. So that was a big deal for me. Bren, did you ever have any kind of moment like that?
Yeah, mine was in 1994 though. And I don't know the date, but I know it was in April of 1994. And I was still living in Atlanta. And I went to see Dorothy Allison. She was speaking at the DeKalb Community College. She published Bastard in 92. So she was still writing, along on that wave. And I swear to, I was sitting in that audience, and the whole time I cried. I felt like I had gone to writing church. I mean, the people beside me were going, lady, you know, get a grip, you know. But I mean, so Dorothy was just up there and just like, you know, talking about bastard and kind of preaching the word and saying things that just resonated with me. I mean, I remember her saying, you know, of course she was cussing. I'm not going to cuss, but she goes, you know, what you got to do is, is what you got to do is you got to take your reader somewhere, and you got to take them somewhere awful, but you got to offer them a way back. And I thought, oh my gosh, and I'm trying to take all these notes and tears falling on my piece of paper. But she just opened me wide open, John, just opened me wide open down to a kind of a guttural, primal level of writing. And that everything else had kind of been safe, you know? And so she just like exploded me into this kind of unsafe area, and just kind of gave me permission to go there. So I have to credit Dorothy Allison for that. And the other one, I mean, is you know, he's dead and gone, but John Steinbeck, is a major influence on me. William Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury, the first book I read that I really got what the voice was. Oh my God, this is voice. You know, between the curling flower spaces or whatever, however it starts. But Dorothy Allison is what just blew me wide open.
Yeah.
So we've got, like what we just mentioned, 3 really good South Carolina writers.
Oh yeah.
And I know Ron lives in North Carolina in that, but he started out in South Carolina, as I recall.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they lived in Clemson at the time. Maybe, but I mean, when I was in high school, he was just like the poet. His wife was my high school English teacher, and he was just sort of the poet that taught at the tech college. I mean, he was, he was just Ron from town, right? Until and then he just really kind of hit the big wave or whatever. But I think that upstate South Carolina, it's pretty astonishing how many how many writers have come out of that corner. Sometimes they call it the dark corner, but I mean, my good friend Mark Powell is
Mark Powell. Was he in Oconee? Where was he? Walhalla?
He was in Oconee. He's from kind of outside Walhalla. Yeah. Gosh, I mean, they were, it's just that little corner. Just I don't know what happened, what was in the water, but it did something.
It did something, didn't it? So yeah. And so you're a publisher now. I mean, you look for Southern stories, I guess.
Well, yeah. So it's kind of an interesting little connection to both Pat Conroy Center and your work to the story behind Haywire. Had my second novel going out. So Hub City put out my first book, but they only published first novels. And Pat Conroy had a press, Story River, and the press kind of went away when he passed away a few years ago. And kind of found out there is not really a publishing venue for non-Appalachian Southern fiction. So like I think Hub City might have expanded beyond first novels at this point, but I mean, there was West Virginia University Press, but they're really focused on Appalachian fiction, and they may have expanded some now, but and there are some other small presses that are kind of crackling up, but in 2018 I really saw kind of what it was a gap in a market, which is who would publish a novel set in low country South Carolina outside of the big New York publishers. Mm-hmm. And then kind of a second focus Haywire Books had was like who publishes second, third, and fourth novels. Everybody wants a debut novel. Everybody wants a best first novel competition kind of thing. But if your first novel out of the gate doesn't get you on the some kind of bestsellers list, it's just selling the second novel is a little more difficult. And because you get kind of trapped in what they call the mid list. So I was really just kind of thinking, who publishes Southern fiction by mid-list writers who are kind of not in the Appalachian mode, and that's where Haywire Books kind of came in to try to fill that gap for a period. Now the pandemic has kind of upended everything in the book market. So I mean, I kind of had built my business plan around the indie book selling community and book tours, that kind of thing, trying to build a little community out of that, but that is, we're on a great pause here. So we'll see what the world looks like after all this is over. So, knock on wood, we got the vaccine going, and, I got the rocket ship behind me, kind of, like
we're going to take off this year.
We're ready for some good news here. We're ready for a good year. So,
Right.
So hopefully we'll, kind of emerge from all of this in short order and, rebuild.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Well, that answered my question about what made you want to start a publishing company.
that and like sheer stupidity. I mean, it's not something I would ever recommend. It's a whole lot of work for for what it is. I mean, it's in fact, people even kind of, plenty of people who know better, who knew better said, John, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, I don't know. Just,
Hey, but you know what? On behalf of writers everywhere, John, I want to thank you for doing that. Really. I know it's a lot of work, but thank you for doing that. Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Trying to, have a little small, contribution to the world of letters.
Well, yeah, you're being a very good literary citizen, that's a great contribution. Thank you.
Well, since John mentioned Story River, Bren, would you like to talk about your experience with Story River?
Oh, yeah. With Story River? Well, it's why I'm sitting here tonight. It changed my life, I mean, I wrote a book that prominently features a cow. New York, I couldn't get an agent. I know, John.
I've been there, done that. Yes.
You got all those T-shirts too. I mean, like a cow, does the cow talk? I mean, it was so far off their scope that they would even entertain a book that had a cow in it. So I found out that, the good news, the silver lining was the rise of the small press. And it was Marlene Rusoff. I was in Spartanburg, South Carolina, John, to her give a talk about the state of publishing in like 2013 or 14, something like that. And she said, the rise of the small press. And she said, and it was at Hub City Books is where she was speaking. And she said, like this place right here, it's a wonderful press. And my client, Pat Conroy, has started his own imprint. And I went, oh my gosh, because I'd read something about that. So I went up to her afterwards and talked to her about it. And so when I drove back to Anderson from Spartanburg that night to see my dad, I felt this energy in me that I'd not felt at all. And so to make a very long story short, I submitted to Story River. And the crazy thing is, when I hit the send button, I knew I was stepping into what had been set up for me. I knew it. I knew it energy-wise. And it was true. It took a year because of all the readers that took place, but it was the best thing that's happened to me, Story River Books. I mean, to think that Pat Conroy even read my book, much less wanted to publish my book. I mean, how do you top that? To me, that's literary nirvana. And Jonathan was my editor, and he knew exactly what to do with a novel that prominently features a cow. In fact, when I thanked Pat at his 70th birthday party 5 months before he died, I said, thank you, Mr. Conroy, for publishing me. And he said, what's your last name? And I told him, and he said, no, what was the name of your novel? And I said, One Good Mama Bone. And here's what Pat did. The cow. Screamed it and reverberated. And, and so what New York and everybody else were like, ooh, cow. It's what Pat Conroy embraced. Yeah. And he just got it and dialed into it. And he changed my life. Story River Books changed my life. I've been to the mountaintop.
Yeah. I think that's the future. I mean, if I had to make a prediction about the future of where the world of letters is going. I mean, I think books are becoming kind of a niche object. I mean, we have so many avenues for entertainment that people that read books kind of like books for a reason. And I think it's become a little easier to start a press, and I think there's a little bit of a kind of a quirky niche that each publisher can kind of fill. So that I think to speak in broad strokes around what New York is doing, I think they're looking for the wide middle still.
Yep.
There's a flatness to the wide middle that is kind of not all that interesting, but most small presses have some jagged edges where, like, if you like one book on Haywire imprint or the Story River imprint, you're probably going to like the bulk of them. But if you don't like it, it's probably none of them are probably for you, right? It's kind of there's a little bit of a roughness to what most good presses are doing. It's just it's a lane, and I think that's what I would feel hopeful about for the future of books, is that there is this sort of bubbling up of different lanes that can give us a little bit of an interesting texture to smaller sales, lower profile, but a whole lot more interesting. You can get a book about a cow, right? Or that
right.
is and that getting back to this idea of like the particulars, right? The particular of the individual self and the individual place. There's a flatness that occurs. I mean, it's the flattening of dialect into neutral speak. It's the flattening of into corporate culture. There's really that kind of homogeneity that I mean, look, I'm sitting here drinking a Starbucks, right? Everything is kind of and literature is sort of is a way of shaking your fist at that and saying the individuals and the particular and the quirky still matter to some degree, which I think is really important. So that's my message to the world is try to maintain that sense of weirdness of the individual.
I agree with you.
Something we need to cling to as the world kind of rockets into the future.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I know we're kind of out of time, but I just wanted to ask real quick. I know earlier, Bren, you had said something in general about the South and Southern writing and this idea of just language and place and how that's influenced. Both of you said you're right. I know Bren, One Good Mama Bone, and John, the new novel, The Merciful, are both set in South Carolina. But I was wondering, as far as it's not a fair, maybe reasonable question to ask because writers never know where they're headed, but do you see your future stories and writing sort of always rooted in this region?
I don't know for sure, obviously, but I would think so. Not only, I'll go a little further for you, not only just in this region, I shouldn't say just, not only in this region, but I think in that time period. I'm not interested in writing a story set in today's time. As a matter of fact, I'm not. I'm just a kind of old school anyway, and I'm much more attracted to the way it used to be. I mean, even the novel I'm writing right now spans really from 1914 to 1978. And I don't know that I can move much past 1978, but I definitely see me writing about South Carolina. It just seems to be where my heart is. What about you, John?
Well, I consciously got out of South Carolina for my second novel, which is The Edge of America, set in Miami in the 80s. But it has a South Carolinian as a character. And then I've got a couple of novels in the drawer that I don't know if we'll ever do anything with, but I have a spy novel set in Charleston and a kind of just like a more literary family novel set in the upstate. So I think there's, you write what you know best and what you're drawn to. And I don't think I've got a Virginia novel in me. I went to graduate school in Indiana and wrote a novel set up there, but I just, it doesn't quite, I don't know, it just doesn't have that same pull as, the place. So I think there's, well, but who knows? Who knows? I think that try to remain open.
Well, I have to be chosen to tell a story. I should say that. I can't just make stuff up. I have to be chosen. And I've only been chosen in South Carolina. Those are the only stories I've been chosen for. And so, Brooke, we'll just see if another state reaches out and grabs me somehow. But I've been chosen in South Carolina by South Carolina.
So maybe it is true, right? What you know. Harry Crews said he tried to write what he didn't know and he failed miserably.
Mm-hmm.
But, Harry Crews.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to write the stories that are yours and yours alone to write, is what I think.
Yeah, I like what you just said about the stories chosen you. So.
Oh, yeah. And so, Wonder Mama Bone, nobody else could have written that. Nobody would wanted to write that, the story of, two mothers, what Sarah Creamer learns from a mother cow. But I sure wanted to write it. I was chosen for that story.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the Merciful and if you have not read either one of these, I recommend that you do as soon as possible.
Yeah, John, yours was out, was it last week?
It was the 19th. So last Tuesday. It's hot off the press.
So John's is brand new and I highly recommend his book. I do.
Yep. So, it looks like those are all the questions for tonight. Did y'all want to say anything else before we?
Big thank you. Huge thank you. I'm humbled and honored to, John, do you remember when we met, I guess so-called met at SEBA in Spartanburg?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and I came by your table. You had a booth, a Haywire booth.
Yeah,
so I've never been on a program with you, and I've really enjoyed it. And
yeah, this is fun, and enjoyed the reading, and appreciate y'all hosting us, and everybody for participating.
Yeah, thank you everybody for spending part of your Wednesday evening with us. I appreciate it very much. I love you all.
Yeah, may we be in person soon.
Yes.
Get back to life.
May we be in person soon. Yeah, I agree.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, Brooke, you were wonderful. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
enjoyed it. Thank you. It was good seeing you again, Bren. And John, it was nice meeting you. And everyone, thank you for coming out tonight. And hopefully we can do this again some other time.
Yeah, and I hope I see
Hopefully
people
one day in person.
Yeah, in person. I hope so. But listen, thank you for this event. It's been awesome. And thanks to everybody for tuning in.
Yeah.
All right. We all have a good night and stay safe.
All right. Sweet dreams.